Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Fighting Matters. I'm Steve Kwan. I've got the Jiu-Jitsu legend here, Stephan Kesting. How's it going, buddy?
Pretty good, or at least it wasn't the worst case scenario that happened yesterday at the Canadian election. So, the party I voted for didn't win. I didn't think it would, but I managed to not split my vote, or I managed to not help split the vote. And so we've ended up with a fairly good scenario. So I'm super relieved about that. I can't tell you what a weight it is off my shoulders.
Yeah. So let's talk about that. What we wanted to do today is break this down. For those who don't know, it is, as of this recording, it's April 29th, 2025. Yesterday was a significant federal election in Canada. Mark Carney from the Liberals representing won against Pierre Poilievre from the Conservatives. A lot of news that came out of that, not directly related to fight sports, but I think, like with everything, politics is intertwined with everything these days. And I thought it would be good to maybe chat, do a reaction on this, and kind of help inform some of our American friends in the audience about what's actually going on up here and what this means and maybe how that impacts the fight sports community in general. So maybe I'll turn that over to you, Stephan. I mean, you give me your kind of breakdown of what you saw last night and what happened.
Well, I think the first thing that our American friends need to realize is that we don't just have two parties in Canada. And, a lot of people take this as an absolute given in the United States, that there are two parties. But of course, the number of parties and the identity of the parties in the States have changed over time as well. So these aren't immutable laws of nature. And in Canada, it's actually a lot easier to have more than two parties. So we've got the Conservatives, Pierre Poilievre, definitely the more Trumpy-ish of the major candidates. We've got the Liberals, so that's Carney, who won basically, kind of, sort of. We've got a federal party that represents a regional interest, the Bloc Québécois, basically advocating for Quebec issues and to some degree in support of Quebec's separation. We've got the NDP, which has kind of been the center-left party historically. We've got the Green Party. Am I missing anybody? Oh, yeah, we've got the People's Party of Canada, which are, as far as I'm
Probably
concerned,
dead after this election. Jeez. Yeah. So
an extreme far right-wing party, I think is fair to say.
Yeah, to kind of draw parallels to Americans who might not be familiar with our system, I guess the big thing that I would draw as parallels are, our Conservative Party is kind of, I guess, similar-ish to the American Republican Party, although not as far to the right. However, the big concern coming out of this election was that clearly our Conservative Party has been taking cues from Trump and MAGA and moving farther to the right, which I think is a big part of the rejection of them and why they lost this election. Our Liberal Party is, I guess they're close, I guess, to the Democrats, but probably a bit more to the left, right? I mean, social issues and being progressive are kind of more of a thing in Canada. We've got socialized healthcare and such, and they're not quite the same as the Democrats, but probably the closest parallel you can draw. The big point of confusion is that the colors are reversed, right? In the States, Democrats are blue, Republicans are red. In Canada, it's the other way around. Liberals are red, Conservatives are blue. But then the big difference in Canada, like you mentioned, is that traditionally, we've been more than a two-party country. This election may have changed that, but we will see. The kind of third party that's often run federally is the NDP, the New Democratic Party. They're the orange ones. And they're basically kind of like a workers' rights, slightly more to the left party than the Liberals are. But the big thing is that in Canada, things like socialized healthcare are a given. There's not some situation where the Conservatives are trying to remove it or anything. Like, every party basically agrees on that. Although my big concern is if you give the Conservatives too much slack on their leash, they might try to remove it or do something like that.
Or the attempts have been made, certainly in some Canadian provinces, that Conservatives have gotten in power in to privatize large parts of it.
Yeah.
So the push is there. And we
Yes.
should be under no illusions that, it'd be like going bankrupt, right? Slowly at first and then all at once. The way to eventually murder something is to underfund it, show how inefficient it is. It's not working, and see we're going to get rid of it all altogether. That's done all the time with things like public transit or the train system or even the healthcare system. See, these hospitals aren't working. Well, you're also not funding them.
Yeah,
And
that is the classic right-wing playbook, right? Is defund and basically suck these systems dry until they can barely function, and then use their failing performance as evidence that you were right all along. Because see, we told you this didn't work, when actually they created a self-fulfilling prophecy by intentionally making it difficult for these people. And you're seeing this a lot in the States right now. I guess in terms of another thing that's probably worth pointing out, right? The Americans have a slightly different system. They've got their three branches of government. For us, God, I am not an expert in the Canadian political system, and I'm worried that I'm going to expose my own ignorance here. But basically, we're a parliamentary system. The way that it works is, everyone has a riding. You vote for the person in your riding, they get a seat. And then all of those people go to parliament, and whichever party has the most seats, the leader of that party is our new prime minister. Now, this can create an interesting situation, because unlike in the States, which is a two-party system, because we've got multiple parties, you can have someone who becomes prime minister but actually doesn't have a majority. So maybe their party gets the most seats, but it's still not 50% of the seats, because we have more than two parties. So this can create an interesting situation called a minority government, which is what we just got yesterday. And that is where the prime minister does not have enough members of parliament to just force things through. And that means they actually have to work with and collaborate with the other parties to come to some sort of agreement. And I guess the other party that I forgot to mention, this a major one, like you said earlier, is the Bloc Québécois. That's an interesting one, because I don't think the States has any equivalent to something like that. It is weird. It is a party that runs at the federal level, so for the whole country, but specifically to protect the interests of one province, Quebec, right? And their focus, of course, is looking out for Quebec's sovereignty, for protecting French language and culture. And they'll never, ever win the federal election, because they really only run in Quebec. So they cannot get enough seats to ever win. But they can get enough seats that they can make a difference and get important say.
They could be a kingmaker.
Yes, at the federal level. So like what's happened here, for example, is Mark Carney's Liberal government has won the election, but they've won a minority. So they don't have enough seats by themselves to just force through everything they want. So they have to go and cooperate with other people. Maybe the way they do that is they can make concessions with the Bloc to come up with some sort of agreements, and then the Bloc Québécois, their people could come in and support the Liberals and get something through together. So there's pros and cons about a majority versus a minority. I mean, the problem with a minority that people always bring up is things are slower, because you can't just force things through. You don't have the votes to do it. Minority governments can also be at risk, because there can be a vote of no confidence. If all of the other parties decide we want to get these people out, they can vote together to basically kill the government and force an election. So minority governments can be shorter lived than a majority. But the benefit to a minority government is people have to actually fucking work together, which I like, right? Like I don't like the idea of one party just running roughshod. But there's pros and cons. Anyway, that's what we got last night.
I believe Canadian healthcare was established under a minority government. It was one of the concessions. I'm going to make sure that I'm right about that, but I believe that it was brought in under a minority government. So you can actually make some pretty big changes, because again, like you said, you actually have to cooperate with people.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, I guess to kind of get into it. So last night, for those who don't know the drama of Canadian politics, we previously had Justin Trudeau as our prime minister. He was of the Liberal Party. That's kind of the centrist Democrat-ish party, I guess, if you want to equate it to American politics. Trudeau over time had gotten wildly unpopular. And, some of it earned, some of it honestly not. There is kind of this like Canadian MAGA equivalent that are just hell bent on just attacking Justin Trudeau for ridiculous things. I don't think
they have very, very subtle arguments like fuck Trudeau.
You know what? I was okay, so people might not know this, but like, you guys in the States have Let's Go Brandon as like the weird conservative spam. Up here in Canada, people, conservatives have been plastering fuck Trudeau bumper stickers and flags all over the place for years, and which I just find incredible, because these are the same people who want to protect our children and their innocence and all of that, and they're so worried about sports, but then they'll put up a 6-foot tall flag that says fuck Trudeau where all of the kids can see it. I was driving down the street the other day and I saw someone with a two fuck Carney stickers on their car, and I thought, wow, that's quick turnaround. This guy's only been prime minister for a very brief period of time and the merch is already moving, so someone is industrious. But
I am going to take issue with one thing you said. You said that Canadian politics has been, or like the right wing of Canadian politics has been moving in a MAGA direction. And I agree with that. Certainly, if you take a look at the buzzwords, you can take a look at things Poilievre said and things Trump said, and it's almost verbatim. And, we're going to end woke thinking in the military. What does that mean? Well, I'm not going to tell you what that means.
Do we even have a military in Canada?
We have a military. We have a military. And
that
the support
one naval
for said
boat
military,
is going to be really fucked.
The support for the military is, I have family members who are serving in undisclosed locations in Eastern Europe right now. So, we have a military. But, we're going to end wokeness in the military. Well, how are you going to do that? Oh, I'm not going to tell you, right? Which kind of opens the door to anything. So I agree that that's been happening, but I'm going to disagree that the disastrous loss that the Conservatives had was a result of that. I think it's 100% because of Donald Trump. So actually, I'm in the position now of having to thank the orange rapist for this election victory. I think Trump's comments about invading Canada, making us the 51st state, declaring economic war on us with tariffs, somehow in the space of 2 months, convincing all of MAGA that their hardships are because Canada has somehow been taking advantage of them. When, 2.5 months ago, they didn't know what the word tariff meant, and now they're 100% sure that Canada's to blame. I think this is so what also should be said is 2 months ago or 3 months ago, the Conservatives, by the polling, were slated to obliterate the Liberals. Like, it was going to be a slaughter. It was going to be one of the worst overturnings of a ruling party in Canadian history. And all of a sudden, the polling lines just cross. It's just it's the most impressive comeback of all time in Canadian politics. And it coincides exactly with Trump's threats of invasion, the tariffs on again, off again, his threats to crush the Canadian auto industry. I think that really brought out the vote. And so it wasn't a reaction to MAGA-like rhetoric on the part of the Conservatives.
Let me clarify my message here. I think the Conservatives, they really liked MAGA until that messaging happened, and then they switched, right? So I think that if the election had happened in, early January, before Trump takes power and starts declaring war on Canada, I think at that point, the MAGA messaging takes them to the prime ministership. But when Trump started attacking Canada, suddenly MAGA became a toxic brand up here. I remember after Trump won back in November, there was a guy I saw walking like right by my house who was wearing like a MAGA shirt in Canada, or MAGA hat rather. And you see those, which is absolutely ridiculous. I mean, even before Trump's whole 51st state stuff, Trump has never been kind to Canada. So it is frankly ridiculous to me that any Canadian would identify with or support MAGA at all, even before this. But people did. And I think a big part of that was the whole Freedom Convoy thing and all of that drama. But after Trump's attacks, even the Conservatives had to heavily moderate their message. Pierre Poilievre, the Conservative leader, made a concerted effort to try to distance himself from MAGA after that happened, despite the fact that he spent years before trying to identify with MAGA. I don't think he was able to convince the Canadians that he had successfully distanced himself. And I think that was the thing that cost him the election, was people, he had spent so much time using the MAGA playbook, adopting their talking points and attacking, I guess, traditional Canadian progressive values. He spent so much time doing that after Trudeau dropped out, which we can talk about and why that happened, he was not able to pivot. He basically painted himself into a corner that he could not get out of. And frankly, Pierre Poilievre does not have anywhere near the charisma to slide on bullshit to escape that kind of problem. So that is, I think, what happened. A brand that previously was working suddenly became toxic, and it pulled the rug out from under him.
Yeah, I did find it funny. There was about a week when Trump was saying things like, "Oh boy, I sure hope that Carney and the Liberals get elected, because they'll be so much easier for me to dominate than those wily Conservatives. I really, I hope everyone votes for the Liberals." Like, okay, dude, we can see right through that. Like it was.
It might work in the States. It's not going to work on Canadians. At least not most of us, I hope.
Not well. We didn't win, or we, like I said, my party. I'm happy to say it. I voted NDP in this election, but I would have voted pretty much anything to stop the Conservatives from getting in. And in my writing, it just made sense to vote for the NDP candidate since he was the incumbent.
Did he win, by the way? I don't know much about your
He
writing.
was ahead in the polling. I can check. We can. Yeah, he was definitely ahead in the results last night. So I didn't see the very final results. Don Davies. Let's see.
While you're looking that up, I'll kind of maybe share a bit of backstory here. So again, Trudeau, longtime Prime Minister of Canada, he'd lost a lot of popularity over the years for a variety of reasons. Again, some conservative talking points around that are frankly bullshit or fabricated, but there's a lot of very legitimate criticisms about Trudeau. Basically, I think that in a lot of ways, his big mistake was over the years, he'd done something to alienate basically every Canadian, right? If you were, a lot of people voted for him because he promised voting reform, which he immediately backed out of, when he got elected originally, I think. He'd also made all sorts of commitments around oil pipelines that he backed out on. And this is not to get into what's right or wrong, but more that people voted for him under the expectation he would do something, and then he betrayed them. Additionally, a big part of his original platform was progressivism. One of his big initial wins was having a truly diverse cabinet. He really did a good job of trying to bring in a diverse cabinet of people that represented the different cultural experiences within Canada. Sounds great, but the problem is that a lot of the people that he brought in wound up resigning and basically going after him because they didn't agree with what he did, or they had ethical concerns about it. I mean, much earlier in his prime ministership, there was a big scandal where it was alleged that Trudeau's team directly meddled with an investigation that was going on against them. I mean, honestly, like this kind of stuff is, in my opinion, sort of Trump level in terms of like the bad things that a government should not be doing. And more recently, just before the election, Chrystia Freeland, who was basically like the number 2 in his government, resigned and basically publicly said his policies were bullshit. And that was basically the end of Trudeau right there. That was where once that happened, everyone basically said, you got to get out of here. If she had not done that, Trudeau probably would have been the person running for the Liberals and probably would have been obliterated by the Conservatives, because like you said, the polling, the people were saying that there was like a 99% chance that the Conservatives were going to win and beat Trudeau. Then Freeland resigned. Then Trudeau resigned. And around that time was when Trump started basically declaring economic war on Canada, which led to this incredible surge of national pride in Canada. One of the big breakthrough moments was Jon Stewart, of all people, on The Daily Show, hosted this weird economist that most people probably didn't know about, this guy named Mark Carney, who had previously done some serious economic heavy lifting for Canada and for the Bank of England. And he basically went on The Daily Show to introduce himself and talk about, the impact of this new changing American relationship. He got over big time. He won a party vote, a dominant party vote. Over 85% of his own party vote voted for him to lead the Liberal Party, which made him the interim prime minister because Trudeau had resigned. But of course, you don't want to be prime minister by default, right? You don't want to be prime minister because the other guy quit and now you get the job. So very quickly, he pushed to have a real election called, which is what we just had yesterday, which he won by, again, a minority vote, a slim vote. I would have liked to see something more commanding, but a win's a win. I'll take it, right? Did I miss anything in the recap there for our American friends, or does that give kind of a good handle on what's been going on up here?
Yeah, I think that's fair. Don Davies did win, so I mean, the problem with third parties and fourth parties and fifth parties is very easy to split a vote, right? If you have 33% of a riding voting for, say, a progressive candidate, and 33% of a riding voting for another progressive candidate, and 34% voting for a not progressive candidate, then the not progressive candidate is going to win, even though only represented by 34% of the vote. So, I mean, there have been lots of, and now we're really nerding out in Canadian politics, there have been lots of talk of changing the electoral system so that it's not just first past the post, that it's some kind of proportional representation.
And that's what Trudeau had promised to do, which he failed to do. And that's part of why so many of the progressive people who voted him in the first place turned against him very quickly. So that's one of the reasons he lost a lot of his popularity, right? Again, the big thing with Trudeau is pretty much and bear in mind too, this guy was prime minister for a long time, right? So over that time period, first of all, you will have inevitably done something to piss off everyone at some point. But also, it's very common that, people just fall out of love with their leaders if they hang around too long. One of the things that we don't have that the Americans do is a 2-year or a 2-term limit, right? American presidents have a 2-term limit unless Trump erases this. In Canada, you don't have that. We can just vote in the same person over and over again until we get sick of them. And what that means is we will inevitably eventually get sick of them, right? So we did this to Trudeau's predecessor, and we did that to him as well. Basically, Canada just burned out on him. There were a lot of very valid problems that Canadians are facing, which Trudeau did not do a great job of tackling. So I think it was time for a change. But the way that it played out was, I don't think, what anyone would have expected.
Yeah. I remember thinking during the height of COVID, wondering what the turnover of whatever the governments that were in power during COVID was going to be. And I thought it would be cataclysmic because no matter whether you're on the side of lockdowns or travel restrictions or not, you were going to be desperately unhappy with the person or the party that was in charge. And I don't know if the statistical analysis has been done, but certainly part of the resentment towards Trudeau is basically he was in power during COVID, and we did have more restrictions on us than we did in the States. So of course this powered things like the Freedom Convoy, and
which we should explain too, because I know that Americans have some awareness of that, but you might want to explain exactly what that was, because that was, I think, the real tipping point where that is where, in my opinion, the martial arts community went insane. I think COVID broke the martial arts community in a fundamental way that we have not recovered from.
And I'm not sure it will, because what broke it? Well, in part, it was people living in entirely different information ecosystems. I heard that COVID kills, 2% of the people who get infected by it. Well, I heard that it's basically just the cold. So you can have differences of opinion and policy, but how on earth are you ever going to have a discussion around policy if we're disagreeing with basic facts? So people, as things like alternative media rose and things like the importance of Joe Rogan and podcasters rose, and the algorithm started getting better and better and better at siloing people, we saw a division of just not only political opinions, but information ecosystems. And this was just jet fueled by COVID. It was kind of the perfect thing. I think we would be a lot less divided if COVID had had an infection fatality rate of 30%. If we'd had like Black Plague levels of death, it would be so much harder.
I thought that originally, but I don't think that anymore. I think the level of delusion amongst some of these people is so great that 1 in 2 people could be dying from COVID, and a lot of them would still deny that it exists. I mean, look at the people in the States, right? Kids dropping dead from measles, and their parents are still saying that they did the right thing by refusing to vaccinate them. Like, there's a level of delusion that we're seeing that I think transcends any rational thought.
Yeah, possibly. I guess we're really getting off topic, but yeah. I think.
Well, let's get back to the Freedom Convoy.
I'm not sure that the martial arts community will ever come back, because people are living in an entirely different information ecosystem. Pick any topic you want. Climate change, it's a hoax. It's going to burn up the planet. The Americans, we should, there's a small contingent of Canadians who do want to join the United States. Currently, it's about...
They're called traitors, Stephan. Yeah. There's a term for that.
And I am concerned. I mean, something like, 43% of Canadians voted Conservative in this last election. So some percentage of those are going to be so mad that they lost that they're going to go and join the traitors. So we might see that 15% swell to 20%, especially once you get concerted misinformation campaigns online, and you start just you're Facebook feed and your Twitter feed just start getting flooded with bots, and and then you start hiring Jordan Peterson to talk about how we should all join the United States. We might see this number go up.
I am worried that we will, right? And I think this needs to be stamped out right the fuck now, right? I mean, look at in the States. Look at how after January 6th, the Americans failed to take that seriously. They failed to hold people accountable. And look what happened, right? They allowed that shit to normalize.
They sent some of the foot soldiers to jail.
Where are they now?
Yeah.
They're back out, right? I mean, so
and the organizer, the perpetrator of it.
They let that shit normalize, and when you let something normalize, it's a lot easier to then allow it to get momentum. So my hope is that in Canada we shut down this seditionist bullshit right now. It is treason to suggest. I mean, in the States, if a state decided they want to secede, like that is treason. And in Canada, I think we need to think of it similarly. That needs to be absolutely shut down with the most deliberate force, because we cannot even allow that kind of bullshit to fester. But I wanted to get your take on this, though, because we talked about this. A big tipping point in Trudeau's prime ministership was the Freedom Convoy. Up until that point, his administration had kind of had a lot of embarrassments, and he was already unpopular, right? There had been a lot of scandals. One that we didn't talk about is the blackface thing. Like, fuck. I hope that whoever you are out there, if you are not Canadian, I hope that you never need to endure the humiliation of having a prime minister who is repeatedly busted for wearing blackface. It was not it was dumb. But anyway, he'd done a lot of things to make us look.
I'm not going to defend that, but it should be pointed out that was years and years before. Like, what was that? In his early 20s?
Younger. Okay, but look, I was 20 at one point too, and you'll never find a video of me running around in blackface. They found multiple videos of this guy doing it, to the point where Trudeau, in a press conference, if I recall correctly, I think he even had to say at some point, like, hey guys, just so you know, this might happen again. I'm not even sure how many of these incidences are out there. Like, that's fucked up. That's real fucked up. So, but all of that aside, the point is, like, he had also been bolstered, though, because when Trump came in, I felt like Trudeau did a really good job of handling Trump in Trump's first term. And I think that lifted his prospects quite a bit, Trudeau's, that is. But the Freedom Convoy was when, again, we started to see the martial arts community lose their mind, but we also saw a broader portion of our population at large lose their mind. So do you want to maybe explain what the convoy was for people who don't know about this, because they understandably weren't following Canadian politics as closely as we were?
So Canada did have more restrictions than most states in the United States, right? We kept vaccination requirements for a couple of months extra. You never had to show your vaccination status to go shop for food, but if you wanted to eat at a restaurant, in most places you had to show. I don't know how long that period was, somewhere in the months, call it 2 to 6 months range. If you wanted to go see a movie, you had to show that you were vaccinated. And this was by the anti-vax crowd and the freedom crowd, who simultaneously believed that COVID was a hoax and that vaccines didn't work, and all that giant conflated set of beliefs. Supposedly there was an organic uprising centered around truckers and truck drivers, who festooned their trucks with Canadian flags, and then drove across the country and essentially took over downtown Ottawa, the capital city, for something like a month. And I know people who lived in downtown Ottawa at the time, and basically you'd be dealing with air horns going 24/7, and the capital city was shut down by these protests. In addition, these protests also ended up shutting down some of the border crossings. I believe, was it the Windsor-Detroit border crossing, which is massively important. Many, many, many millions of dollars of trade go across that border every day. So by having the protest right there at the border, you were essentially robbing, Canada, because they were Canadians, of millions of dollars of parts and materials and income. So it was an effective protest in that sense. The government did eventually take a resort to doing things like freezing the bank accounts of some of the people in that movement. And this was perceived as the most, fascist level of totalitarian control ever. Okay. And there was a parliamentary inquiry about that later. Now, how organic was it? That's a good question. What were the other allegiances of these people? Certainly many of the Freedom Convoy people were in the white supremacist and white supremacist adjacent spaces.
They were literally flying swastikas at those protests, right?
And sometimes, not all of them.
Okay, but I mean, okay, so it's not like they all were flying swastikas, but my take is if you're part of a protest movement and part of that coalition involves, active Nazis who are unapologetic about that, and you do not immediately remove those people from your coalition, then you are effectively one of them, as far as I'm concerned. And there were a lot of photos of people flying swastikas and all sorts of other hate symbols at those rallies. And again, I would guess that, 99% of the people there did not adopt those beliefs, but they also refused to do anything about it. And they were more than happy to invite those people into their tent, which I think says a lot about them.
Yeah. And all those, it's amazing how if the Freedom Convoy people with their trucks covered in Canadian flags and they just love Canada so much like the Second Amendment crowd in the States has forgotten to rise up against a tyrannical government, the Freedom Convoy people in Canada forgot to rise up against the foreign threat, Donald Trump threatening to invade their country. So they just went over and fully embraced the traitorous beliefs that they should be absorbed by another country. So, yeah, I would take them more seriously if, having fought for the rights of Canada and Canadians, to, if that's what they believe, to now stand up and say, hey, we're going to fight against the threat on the southern border. But of course they haven't.
Yeah. And I would say one other thing too about this convoy, right, is look, I am 100% in favor of people having the right to protest, even in situations where I disagree with them. My issue is not that there was a protest. My issue is more that, first of all, they effectively tried to harm the city, right? They tried to gridlock the city. They tried to shut everything down. They made it very difficult to live there for a while. But also the people who met some of the people who were behind the convoy had also published manifestos where they were like, their stated goal was to basically replace the government with their own loyalists. So that's an insurrection, right? I mean, if part of your stated plan as part of these protests is we want to replace the government with our people, that's a coup, right? If that's what you want. Now, they had the common sense once that was called out to remove those statements and take them, to disassociate with them, but you don't make those statements by accident. And for me, at least, it's hard to walk back from something like that. There were also incidences too, where here in Vancouver, where these people were brigading hospitals and like emergency ambulances couldn't get into the hospital. So like that to me is beyond the realm of acceptable protest.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. That should be pointed out as well. Why do you think that the Freedom Convoy movement broke the Jiu-Jitsu community? Just whether you supported them or whether you didn't?
So, you brought up a good point that for a long time, people have been living in separate information bubbles. And I think this has been going, I mean, you could probably trace this back as early as the 90s, maybe even the 80s. It's just gotten more and more effective.
If in the 1970s, you wanted to live in an information bubble, say you only wanted to read, I don't know, fucking Marxist manifestos, you could. But it would be a lot of work because you'd have to never pick up the newspaper. And every time that you communicated with friends, like the trouble is, how many people communicate with their friends through Instagram or Facebook Messenger or other social media apps? And if you do that, then you're exposed to all the stuff in the social media apps. The amount of effort required to slip into an information bubble was a lot more. And there weren't these super sophisticated algorithms going. Steve Kwan. We know it's a Monday. We know that Steve, and we know it's early in the morning. We know that Steve on a Monday, early in the morning, is grumpy. And we know the thing that keeps him on Facebook or whatever the longest is girls jumping on trampolines in the bikini. But in the afternoon, that's when we hit him with the political content.
That's
when we just make him completely outraged about some story. I mean, there are outrageous stories on both sides of the aisle. The world is full of outrageous stories. But which ones you select, that's, if you just cherry pick things, a million things happen every day. You can only present somebody 100 things per internet browsing session. So which of those million things do you present to Steve to get him to stay on the platform? Well, if we can outrage the fuck out of him, he's more likely to stay on the platform. The end. So, sorry, I went off on a tangent about information bubbles.
No, I think that's kind of part of it, right? It not only have people been in these bubbles for a long time, but the bubble makers, like you said, have developed increasingly sophisticated tools to keep and entrap people in those bubbles. I think, though, for a long time, despite the fact that we were living in increasingly separate realities, there was at least this ability for people to coexist, right? I mean, back in like the 2000s and the 90s, I mean, look, you might really dislike people from the other political party, but whatever, let them do what they want to do. But I think the pandemic was the first time when those fake realities started intersecting with the real realities. And we realized that, okay, one of these realities has to be true right now. We can't just pretend to live in these different parallel universes. There is a virus going around, and we either take it seriously or we don't. This is not just an abstract concept now. People need to change their behavior. And I think that's why the martial arts community especially, but also the broader right wing, completely broke at that point, because they'd been living in this info bubble for a long time. And then now that friction hit up against reality, right? You've got doctors telling you that, look, we got to take this seriously. That means you might not be able to go to Applebee's tonight, right? And that kind of thing, I think, that where you've been living in this info bubble for years and years and years, and it's really just been up here though in your brain. But then suddenly now it's hit the streets, right? You have to take actual action. A lot of people push back on that. And anytime an emergency like that happens, there's always going to be people who push back. I understand that. But the big thing was the willful embrace of fake information, disinformation. That I think was kind of one of the defining things. And once in your heart you have truly accepted falsehoods as truth, it's really hard to change your mind on that. So at this point,
I'll go a subtle difference there. Yeah, accepting falsehoods as truth is a problem. But the problem that's one level deeper than that is once you've written off a certain source of information, that opens the door to falsehoods. Once you can say, oh, that's the CDC telling you that? Well, we don't listen to the CDC. Oh, that's the Associated Press telling you that? We don't listen to the Associated Press. Oh, that's the National Institute of Health telling you that? That's somebody with a PhD in virology who's saying something I don't like. We don't listen to that. And then that allows the 0.01% of epidemiologists who have a platform, who have information that's aligned with what you want to hear. Then you start following, and that's 0.1% of epidemiologists. They have their own reasons. People are insane. People are motivated by money. People are wrong. People have Nobel disease. There's all kinds of reasons why individual scientists are wrong. In aggregate, science is an aggregate process. So I think the biggest problem really is wholesale rejection of anything that you read in any newspaper, wholesale rejection of anything that's covered on MSNBC or The Guardian or the New York Times or on the CDC website. And if you rule out accepting any information from sites and processes and institutions that actually have some kind of fact checking, then you're opening the door to fantasy. Say what you want. The Guardian and the New York Times have their problems, but they do have standards, they do have fact checking. I would argue that these things are completely non-existent at Fox News.
Yeah. So, I mean, again, back in 2020, when all of this happened, that I think was kind of where we started to see this schism. We started to see, especially in Canada, this incredible embrace of like this extreme right movement. And that's when Trudeau's prospects really started to tank and started to fade. He was able to call one election during the pandemic and survive that one, which frankly is a decision I strongly disagree with calling an election during a pandemic. That was another thing that really hurt him. And he lost his majority by doing that. He went from a majority to a minority, but he still maintained power. And his popularity had been whittling away to the point where, as of around January of this year, his polling numbers were abysmal, like some of the worst I'd ever seen, maybe the worst in polling history in Canada, where, again, there was a poll at one point where people were polled and asked, how many of you are want to see Justin Trudeau get elected again in 2025? And the number of people who were excited about it was something like 11%. That is unbelievable. Like, if that election had gone forward under those conditions, Trudeau would have lost probably one of the biggest landslides in a modern democracy that I can think about. But then Trump started talking. And Trump was definitely the deciding factor in this election. A lot of the things that Pierre Poilievre had been saying that were very MAGA adjacent and were getting traction suddenly went in the opposite direction. And I think we should clarify for our American friends what the real perception is up here, because I don't know if they all totally know. For me, at least, it's not really so much about the tariffs. I mean, I think that tariffs in this case are mostly a bad idea and mostly unproductive. But if you really want to do tariffs, like every country does them, there are ways you can implement tariffs that are respectful and long-term thinking with the focus of growing your industries. And, if Trump had come to Canada and said, hey, guys, look, we're really struggling here. We need to rebuild American manufacturing. We want to reduce our dependency on Canadian goods and services. So sorry, but this is how we want to do things. So over the next 5 years, we're going to phase this out. Let's work with you and we'll figure something out. I don't think any Canadian would have really been upset. I mean, we've really only had open free trade with America for a few decades anyway. It wouldn't have been that bad, and it's an understandable thing. The problem is, first of all, just the sheer disrespect in terms of how that was handled. But more importantly, the 51st state stuff that is the absolute real deal breaker, right? I mean, I think a lot of Americans think that that's a joke or it's trolling or it's funny. But make no mistake that Canadians generally take that as an act of war or aggression. I mean, people have straight up said this is a form of war, whether you call it economic warfare or whether you consider it something worse. We have a foreign power, our closest ally, who Canadians have died to protect, now telling us that their goal is to destroy our country economically so that they can consume us. And this is not a fringe belief. This is part of Mark Carney's platform that he won under, right? He has specifically said that America's stated goal is to break us so that America can own us, which is a factually correct statement and not an exaggeration. That is just a paraphrase directly of what Donald Trump has repeatedly said, even when it's been brought up to him that this is absurd. And people have given him the chance to walk it back and say, Donald, are you sure this is a bad thing? And he still just doubles down on it. So this is the real sticking point, right? I mean, tariffs are just an economic thing. They come and they go, right? If America really wanted to tariff our wood, I mean, look, it's going to suck, but we can work around it. But threatening annexation is... I still can't even really believe that this is a discussion we're having. I expected bad things from Trump getting back into power, but I did not think in 2025 that we would be having a serious discussion about America attempting to annex Canada. That is
Imagine last year. Imagine we go back in time 1 year ago, and we're there. We are the Cassandras. We are saying, look, if Trump gets elected, they're going to threaten to invade Canada, and they're going to make plans. Could you imagine how we would have been poo-pawed? Oh, you've completely lost it, Kwan. You're out of your mind, Kesting. You are fear-mongering. This is ridiculous. Stop. That you guys should check yourselves in for a psychological assessment. Can you imagine predicting this a year ago? The amount of mockery we would have received. And here we are.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, and I mean, and the thing is, there are still people now who listen to this who will say that we're overreacting and this is a joke and it'll never happen. To which I say, I heard that from the Supreme Court when they said Roe versus Wade wouldn't be overturned. They were very clear they would not do that. Donald Trump rejected Project 2025. He'd never heard of these people, didn't even know what it was, never read it, didn't know them. Look where we are now. Roe v. Wade is long dead now. The U.S. government, the fucking Treasury, is being run by the architect of Project 2025. There is a tracker that shows what percentage of the Project 2025 stated objectives have actually been executed on. It's a lot. They are doing this. I'm sorry, Kamala was right. She said exactly what was going to happen, and this is what happened, right? And so Trump is sitting here saying he's going to annex Canada, and to disregard that or take it as a joke would be foolish, considering the fact that every outlandish thing he's done in the past, he's at least attempted to move on.
Yeah. And last time he was president, he didn't have the infrastructure, and he hadn't surrounded himself with people whose only criteria is loyalty to him. I think it's fair to say this time Trump has purged the military, purged the cabinet, purged government, at least at the higher levels so far, of people who might present any kind of check or balance. He's threatened to imprison judges who interfere with his agenda. There are no guide rails or safety rails anymore. So I think this is something that we really do have to take seriously, and this is 100% why Carney won. I mean, on the economic front, I think they have a fairly good plan. I mean, their economic plan was quite detailed, twice as long as the conservative plan. 1/4 the number of pictures of the of the potential prime minister. I think the conservative platform was 30 pages long and had like 4 or 5 full-page glossies of Poilievre doing working man stuff. And the Liberal plan had one picture of Carney on the front cover. 60 pages long, very detailed plan on how to deal with one of the most pressing domestic issues, which is housing prices. Basically bringing back the tax structures from the 1970s when people were building things like apartment buildings, not for luxury condos, and a plan to, try and save our lumber industry by building millions of new, smaller houses for people to move into. It's a good plan. Whether they do it or not, who knows? But it's a good plan. And so that's a domestic issue that he's been good on as well. And again, I didn't vote for the guy, but I'll take it.
Yeah, I mean, people might sometimes listen to this stuff, and I see in the comments sometimes people say, like, you guys are a bunch of left-wing idiots or whatever. And I mean, I just want to emphasize, I am not affiliated with any political party. I will gladly switch my vote to whichever party I think is best at the time. It just so happens that in my lifetime, the Conservatives have, in my opinion, never run a candidate that deserved my vote. But if they did, and there is an alternate reality where Mark Carney could very well have run as a Canadian Conservative. I mean, he was being offered Canadian leadership jobs by previous Conservative governments. There is a universe where I would have voted for him as a Conservative. But it just so happens that in my lifetime, they keep running these guys like Poilievre, and that just is very unappealing to me. So this time around, I voted for Carney, which is, I mean, in the past, for most of my adult life, I would have voted for other parties. But in this case, I thought, you know what? He's the right guy at the right moment. His plan is sensible. He definitely has the experience in the areas that matter, I think, which is economics. And moreover, there's a degree of honesty in the way that he speaks that, I mean, he's been very open about how, like, look, this is going to be rough for Canadians. And that kind of honesty means a lot to me, that he's kind of telling us, like, you guys need to brace for impact. We're losing our biggest trade partner. This is going to be difficult. Whereas a lot of the time, conservative thinking is more kind of like, it's more about presentation. Like, how do you dress this up to an ideal that everyone can get on board with? But sometimes when you do that, you lose the truth of the matter, and you don't really tell people the reality of how bad it's going to suck. Take a look at the tariff situation in the States, right? Where Trump dressed this up as, it's not a tax on Americans. It's going to make everything great again. And I mean, look at what's happening, right? I mean, within the jiu-jitsu community, merch brands in the States are getting obliterated because all of the cost of their goods is skyrocketing to the point where their businesses may not be viable anymore. I bet you a lot of those companies, I bet you the people behind them voted for Trump. So the one thing about Carney is I felt he was less likely to lie to me. And also I think his experience is more relevant. Whereas with Poilievre, I have no reason to trust this guy. He's demonstrably telling falsehoods quite often, and perhaps more than that, going for the full Trump playbook because it's convenient and then switcherooing that and trying to distance himself because it's not is very disingenuous. And I just can't trust someone like that who is clearly just saying what they need to say to get elected. Whereas I don't think Carney ever did that.
I think you're right. I hope you're right. And fingers crossed, it's going to be a fucking interesting ride. I mean,
it will be.
In 1 month, maybe the tariffs are gone and the invasion threats back on the agenda, or maybe they've started a war with Iran, or maybe they've invaded Panama. Who the fuck knows? So it's all part of making America great again, I assume.
I guess so. Yeah. Well, one thing that we should talk about that was weird about this election was, as far as I could tell, like at least 3 of the party leaders lost their own seat in their own riding.
I think that's easy to explain. So,
yeah.
Like, for example, was it Jagmeet Singh?
Pierre
the head of the
Poilievre,
NDP.
and Maxime Bernier. I mean, he's not a major political party, but he's a known name in here, and they all lost their own seats despite being the heads of the party.
Well, the Poilievre one is an interesting example, and I'm pretty sure we're going to see howls of protest and accusations that the election was stolen, because that's just the playbook. But in terms of, I mean, a lot of the liberal victory came at the expense of the smaller parties. Not very many.
A lot of the conservative growth, too, though, also came at the expense of the smaller parties. Like, if you look at the way that the votes broke down, the smaller parties got obliterated because people flocked to both the Liberals and the Conservatives. It just turned out that the Liberals got more votes overall in the places that mattered.
Yeah, I was at like 46% of Canadians voted for Liberals and 43% of Canadians voted for Conservatives, something like that. Of course, it doesn't matter, because if, it's depending on the spacing of those votes, it can...
Sort of like the Electoral College in the States, right? Popular vote doesn't matter. It's did you win the ridings and count those up, right? So that part's similar.
But I certainly think that, there were a lot of NDP supporters that I knew who were like, my heart says NDP, my brain says Liberal, because I don't want to split the vote. And we've got to stop Canada from getting a MAGA light or a Maple MAGA candidate running the country. So it's unfortunate. Which is too bad, because Jagmeet does jiu-jitsu.
So people who've listened to me talk about this may have heard me discuss this before. So Jagmeet Singh, the leader of the NDP here in Canada, is local to Stephan and myself. He's in our province, and he is a grappler. He trains jiu-jitsu. And I've always thought, you know what? If you don't like what your political leader is doing, you can drive 20 minutes to his gym and kick his ass. Like that is political accountability that you don't see in many places. But if you don't
like what Trump is doing, you can go to Bedminster and kick his ass on the golf course, right?
Well, no, he never loses, from what I understand. He's like Kim Jong-il. He always wins at golf. But yeah, so Jagmeet, though, they had run this guy many, many times. And I mean, he seemed like a good guy, but just his popularity was never there. I think I was never impressed really by his leadership. I mean, I'm not saying he's a bad person or anything, but just he wasn't able to inspire the party. That party, the NDP, was tremendously popular before he took over, and every time he ran, it got less and less popular, to the point where it appears now they've lost official party status. In his own riding, where he was the incumbent, he got less than 20% of the vote last I checked in his own riding. That is devastating. And so he had to resign, which he did.
I do wonder how much of that is explicable just because of the fact that he's brown and wears a turban.
I've wondered the same. It is possible. I mean, I would say this, though, like, it's not like he was always unpopular. He just was never able to quite put it together, but his popularity has waned. And his particular style, I think, was not super inspiring. But you know what? It's a party reboot now that they can do. But maybe the more interesting thing is that Pierre Poilievre, the conservative guy, lost his own seat. So this puts them in a very awkward position, because generally speaking, the prime minister I mean, I don't think it's a rule, but they're supposed to at least have been an elected official and, represented in their own riding. He lost in his own riding. So this is interesting, too, because the Conservatives' big criticism of Carney for the last few weeks has been, this guy was never elected because Trudeau stepped down and this guy just took over and he's not a valid PM, which first of all is bullshit disinformation. That's not how Canada works. He was absolutely a legitimate prime minister. But then beyond that, now Carney has actually won an election. He's won a seat with a riding, whereas Poilievre has lost his own seat. So I'm curious to see, well, I know what the answer is going to be, but I'm curious to see if the Conservatives are going to stand up and say, and hold themselves to their own standards and say Poilievre has to go now because he's not an elected official. But I don't expect that. We'll see what they do, though.
The next Conservative candidate, for sure, I think, is going to be Doug Ford, the populist mayor of Toronto.
And you know what? I would be in favor of that. I think he's the best candidate they've got and probably the least objectionable to all parties. I mean, I'm not the hugest fan of his, but Doug Ford has definitely impressed me in situations that matter. And so if they're going to run
swinging against the United States, and that seems to be, so he's got his legit, never 51st state credentials.
Yeah. Well, he's done more than that. So for those who don't know, Doug Ford is the giant blonde oafish guy that you always see on the news in Canada. And yes, he is the brother of Rob Ford, the meth mayor or whatever that we had. So anyway, Doug Ford, he's policy-wise, granted, he's Ontario. I don't really follow their politics that closely, but I have the feeling I wouldn't vibe with a lot of the stuff he does. But I will say this about him. Every time there's been a 5-alarm fire, he's performed. When COVID happened, he was the first politician I know of that actually came out, did a conference, brought out his medical experts, and was honest with the people. Because everyone else was saying, oh, we just need to hunker down for a week. It's going to be fine. I remember him coming out with his medical team and saying, this is going to be an unprecedented crisis and everyone needs to buckle up. And then with Trump, he's absolutely demonstrated, I think, his Canadian pride and his ability, his willingness to defend the country, even though by his own admission, he was a Trump supporter before. I respect that. I think that if they're going to run someone, he's probably got the best chance of attracting people who aren't completely married to a party.
Yeah. Well,
but that's a problem for the future because right now we got this new guy, so we will see what happens.
Yeah. Well, fingers crossed, elbows up, and I guess we're. I'm voting with my dollars, right? I just canceled a trip to Portland. I'm not going to spend money in a country that keeps on threatening to invade me, and went and spent it in Europe instead. So
I had multiple business trips planned down to the States this year, and I've canceled all of them for the same reasons. But not just that, not just as a protest vote. Americans may not be aware, but our government has advised us to cancel travel to the States. That is the government's stance right now because of not just because we want to support Canadian businesses, but because of the risk of Canadians attempting to cross into the border. This is happening. I think a lot of Americans who maybe live in the Fox News bubble think that these deportations are only happening to really terrible Venezuelan crime gangsters. That is not the case. Some completely innocent Canadian actress or something was fucking detained and thrown into a camp. And
for 2 weeks. She's out now.
Yep.
But I'd rather not spend 2 weeks in a cinder block cell.
Well, I listened to an interview from her. The only reason in her mind that she got out, if I remember correctly, was because she was able to get in contact with people who could advocate for her on the outside. If she hadn't been able to do that, she might still be in there for all we know.
Well, it's interesting because it turns out the Guardian did a real good piece on her. And it turns out that when ICE detains you, they don't detain you. They farm you out to one of the giant for-profit incarceration companies, the prison industrial complex. So now you're in XYZ company's private prison complex, and they're charging the U.S. government, I'll make up a number, $5,000 a day to detain terrorist Canadian actresses who had a visa irregularity.
Now, okay, in fairness, we don't know what she acted in. She might have made some really shitty movies and maybe she deserved to be put in jail. I don't know.
But people are making money keeping people in custody. This is the prison industrial complex. And so what is their motivation to give you contact to your lawyer? What is their motivation to give you access to email or to make a phone call? Zero. They get to make more money the longer they keep you. And they've already, who was it? The idea has already been proposed that people looking for visas to the United States, that they have to submit their social media profiles, and that there's AI scraping of your social media profiles. If this current administration south of the border scrapes my blue sky, or scrapes my threads, or scrapes this podcast, I'm fucked. So,
well, that's why I'm not going down there, right? My choices in my mind are, I be authentic and I make the kind of content that people expect me to make, or I shut up and I go to the States and just pretend like nothing is happening. And I think that only one of those answers has any moral merit behind it. So I'm staying up here for now until, and you know, here's the thing that I think a lot of Americans may not have perspective of, right? It's not just that Trump is in power and, oh, we can wait this out for 4 years. Like, the damage has been done, right? The perspective of other countries is, look, this Trump thing is not a one-time fluke. You guys had him already, and now you wanted him back, knowing exactly what you were getting into.
and if it's not him, it'll be the next fucking guy.
So all that we can say in Canada, all that we know is, like, look, every 4 years things could go completely insane. Maybe you guys elect some centrist Democrat next time, but maybe the election afterwards, maybe JD Vance is president and we're right back to this again. So it's not just a thing that's going to disappear in 4 years, right? The rest of the world is not as married to America as America thinks they are. And I think that's going to be a devastating wake-up call for America. I really hope, for the sake of my American friends, that this is resolved cleanly and they're able to restore their government and restore order and have some consistent stability and a consistent democracy. But I don't know if our generation will ever fully trust America again. I mean, my kids' generation might not even. It might take many generations to get to the point where we are back to the terms that we were on even just a few months ago.
Yeah. And that's sad, because I like going to the States and I like visiting my American friends, and I've done many wonderful trips there, and that's done. Possibly for the rest of my life. We'll see. But I hope I'm wrong on that one. I really hope I'm wrong, and that you and I are doing a BJJ mental models camp in fucking Georgia 5 years from now. But we'll see.
Yeah. I mean, something that I'll just maybe close this off with. There's always a good question to ask here. And you and I were just talking about this. How do you actually know if you're in an info bubble, right? I mean, can you ever really know if you're living in a simulation, right? Is basically the question. And I mean, look, we have to accept the fact that maybe we are in some woke-ass liberal information bubble. Maybe we are the woke-ass liberal information bubble. So you always need to know, how can I have perspective? And a good suggestion that I heard is, if you want to know if you're living in like a state-run bubble, check the news from other countries to see what they're saying about you. And I would strongly encourage everyone listening to this, if you haven't, listen to some of the things that Mark Carney has said. Specifically, listen to his victory speech last night. And the fact that he describes America the way that he does, our closest ally, the fact that he will openly say this as the leader of our country, it should chill you to the bone, because this is not a unique perspective. And I think that if you live in the States and you still think that, like, no, this is fake news, this is woke bullshit, there's no chaos, everything is fine, it's all made up, there's no Venezuelan deportation, concentration camp, that's all fake. If you believe that, like, look at what the rest of the world is saying. Because again, back to the conspiracy theory thing that you were talking about earlier, right? Like, if everyone else agrees that you're the crazy one, maybe pay attention to that just a little bit.
Yeah. To kind of insulate myself from being in an information bubble, I do a couple of things. Number one, I do go to Fox News regularly, and I do listen to Alex Jones regularly. Now, Alex Jones is kind of because I want to get ahead of the wild conspiracies that are coming out of his mouth this month, but are be coming out of Joe Rogan's mouth 2 months from now. So, but I do go to Fox News regularly. Secondly, the areas that I understand better than other areas. I'm not an economist. I'm not a political scientist. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a human rights lawyer. I'm not a trade specialist. But I do have 2 degrees in biology, and I did spend 15 years working as a research biologist. I have spent my time studying statistics and experimental methods and doing research in the literature. This has allowed me to go into the literature, the actual source literature for things like climate change, and unfortunately for me, cell biology, virology, and to some extent epidemiology. So it allows, that's a blessing and it's a curse. So now, if I can read the scientific literature, which I can in certain aspects, there's literature I wouldn't be able to read, and see that the scientific consensus around, say, climate change is as close to 100% as you're going to get. And then I go to two media outlets. I go to the New York Times or the Guardian, or until recently, even the Washington Post. And I go to Fox News, or I go to One America, or I go to the Epoch Times, or whatever the fuck on the other side. And one is blatantly lying about what the data says. That erodes my trust in that. If they were in line with the scientific data, I'd have to give that more credence. I can only make this assessment on a couple of different areas. But if you're lying about basic virology, if you're incapable of converting a death rate to a percentage effectively, like that whole multiply by 100 if you divide one number by the other to make a percentage, like Tucker Carlson, if those basic factual reporting is lacking on one side in the areas, so not very many areas that I'm able to assess, then I'm going to assume that your standards of truth and your epistemology are broken in other areas as well.
Well, I don't have all of those fancy degrees, Stephan, but I do have a podcast. So I think that makes me, by 2020 standards,
you have two podcasts now.
I have multiple podcasts, so I am like way more qualified than anybody. Yeah, I hope this was an interesting chat. I don't know if anyone's going to listen to this, but because we've got so many people in our community who are in the States, I thought it would be interesting to give them kind of an insight into like what this Canadian election actually means, and also how American policy is really being reflected in the world. Because the one thing that I've heard from a lot of Americans is it's not necessarily that they agree with the things that Trump is doing. It's more they don't believe it. They think it's exaggerated, or it's really no big deal, or it's not as big a deal as the libs are making it out to be. And I hope that people listening to this and seeing how America's closest friend in Canada is reacting to them, and just the incredible changes we're making to distance ourselves. I hope that really helps people realize that this is not just a joke or a meme or trolling. This is being taken seriously, and in a way that will impact Americans. I know that Americans like to think like we're number one, we're the greatest, we don't need anybody. But there's a lot of stuff you do need, right? And you're going to find out in a few months if these tariffs keep up. So I really hope that this at least gives people a perspective into what it's like living north of the border.
Stop fucking trying to invade us, eh? Here, I'll give you
that.
I'll give you the screenshot that we need for this episode.
Stephan just flexing with his Canadian shirt on for audio listeners. Awesome. Thanks, buddy. Anything else you wanted to add, or did we cover everything?
I think we're good. I think we've mangled Canadian politics enough for everybody.
Yeah, I fully expect that I got 50% of everything I said wrong, so please feel free to eviscerate me in the comments if I fucked up. But thanks a lot, Stephan, and thanks for everyone listening. Talk to you guys next time.